Underlying all of these, of course, is digitalization. Almost none of the three things I said could actually happen without the fact that a lot of the work we now do is digitalized. Okay? One way in which this point was really driven home to me with vengeance in some sense was right at the beginning of the pandemic, 2020 March or so. I ran this big survey of INSEAD alumni and trying to get a sense of how had distributed working, remote working, and stay-at-home working affected their organization. Okay? And most people had the intuition, including myself, that some industries and some businesses would be worse affected than others. So things like restaurants, like hotels, like things like that, right? Where there's a clear customer interaction component, are going to be affected worse. Guess what? It turns out, because most INSEAD alumni are not working in frontline jobs, they're working in managerial jobs, right? And once you climb a couple of layers in the hierarchy away from frontline work, all organizations use managers. All managers do knowledge work, and knowledge work is fully digitizable. So it turned out there was actually no difference across industries or companies in the extent to which the pandemic affected them adversely. There was a lot more variation within industry than between industries. Okay? It really came down to things like which companies had already been using remote working before, which companies had cloud architecture, which companies already had a Zoom license, for God's sake, right? Basic stuff. These are the things that mattered in explaining which organizations could compete in this new regime of distributed working and which ones could not. So digitalization is really, really a core process that is just here to stay, right? Some forms of the digitalization now include simple algorithms which become templates for organizing. So blockchains, right, are essentially a technology that create a distributed ledger and that allow people to create records that cannot be altered easily. So their primary purpose really was in distributed finance, decentralized finance. But increasingly, people are asking themselves, how can I use blockchain ideas to run my supply chain? Okay, the same principles apply. So we want to make sure there's an immutable record. We want to make sure it can't be tampered with. It's completely transparent. We can use the same idea. Okay, so both of these aspects, digitalization driving more data creation, which can then be fed through intelligent algorithms. So a big part of what I do at INSEAD is actually run the Org 2.0 elective for our MBAs. So this is the application of data to do organization design. So we use machine learning techniques to do things like forecasting who's going to quit the company. Okay, trying to figure out better who would be a better hire for us. How do you compose optimal teams? Okay, which people should come to work together? Which network links in the organization are missing and should be created? How do you run A/B tests to prototype different organization designs and figure which ones will work or which ones will not? And we couldn't do any of this if it wasn't for the fact that for the last 3 years, we've been collecting through the pandemic an amazing amount of data on how organizations work, because it's all there in the Zoom log, right? Before 2019, if I wanted to understand how an organization worked, what were my choices? I could go interview a few people, usually the powerful people. So the story they tell you may not be the truth. I could run a survey, okay? Survey response rates on average are about 20%. So you go to a large company, run a survey, you're going to get a small sample of people who clearly had nothing better to do with their time than fill out my survey. But now I know everything, okay? I know everything. I know who's talking to whom, how often, what frequency. And you're going to ask, what about privacy? Yes, what about privacy? So the fact is, a lot of the analytics we can get out of this data does not require us to compromise privacy at all. At all. I don't need to read the content. I don't need to know the names of the people. I just need to understand the network structure. I can see where the holes in the network are and how we can fill them. So everything I've said, whether it's about the diversity push, whether it's about decentralization, whether it's about distributed working, all those trends are riding on this one, which is the fact that organizations increasingly are digital. So these 4 big trends, right? Distributed work, the push towards diversity, the push towards decentralization, and the push towards digitalization. Notice I picked Ds, all 4 Ds, right? Easy to remember. So the 4 Ds are really driving the major changes we see in organization designs going forward. And a lot of what's coming in the next decade or so is really going to be to use the data that comes out of digitalization to make design choices to cope with those trends in an evidence-based manner, rather than do it by gut feel or by copying best practice. So the days when you adopt an organization design because McKinsey tells you all your peers are doing it, that's over. Now we can actually run the A/B tests within our organization and see what works for us, right? And the reason to do that is actually very simple. If you think about the difference between our biology, between me and him, just to take a random example, I'm not picking on you, okay? We look very different, no? But the reality of it is, actually, we look very similar. The, the reality of it is, our biology is so similar that pharma companies can confidently give both of us the same pill, knowing that it's going to work with almost equal effectiveness. That's the reality, right? But compared to organizations, the difference between them is huge. And the biggest reason the difference arises is people are not randomly thrown into organizations. So they're not two representative samples of the same set. People select very carefully which company they join, right? They like the culture, they like the pay, they like the working conditions. Some people like different things. So of course, different organizations have different compositions of people, okay? So if different organizations have different compositions of people, why on earth would we expect that the design that works here will work here, right? We shouldn't. And yet the entire practice of best practice copying in terms of org design has been predicated on that assumption. It's wrong, okay? And in the past, maybe we had no better alternative. We didn't have data. Now we do. So this is really the big change coming to all of us. And I think this is really the cutting edge, if you like, of how organization design thinking is going to look going forward.